Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on preventing greenwashing, an update on the self-regulation 2.0. We're very happy to have you with us this morning. So here is the agenda for today's webinar. First of all, we'll have the chance to have a couple of words from our CEO, Adrian Schatzmanns, who is also on the call. Then we thought it could be useful to take this opportunity to give you a couple of updates on the EU side. Then very swiftly, a bit of background and, as usual, the main advantages of self-regulation before jumping in what has changed from 1.1 to 2.0. Then we'll elaborate on the next steps, and then we have a key message to finish with on preventing greenwashing. We plan a second webinar after the summer, more on that at the end of today's session. Adrian, the floor is yours for the introduction.
Thank you, Guillaume, and good morning. Just a couple of words from my side. First and foremost, I think it is a good result, what we heard last week. The Federal Council decided to give priority to the self-regulation. And if I listen also to the AMAS board, I think it's a good result for three reasons. First, we all agree that sustainability, the regulation is in flux. And to have a flexible instrument as the self-regulation makes a lot of sense. To establish a law would take a lot of time, and by the time it is ready, it's probably outdated. So the self-regulation is the better instrument for the time being. The second point I see that is very important, it's a self-regulation established by the industry. Many of you worked on this, many of you contributed to this, and who knows better than you? So in other words, if you want a quality, want to assure quality, then it's important that we have the industry involved. And in this case, we not only had AMAS involved, but also SBA and the Insurance Association. So overall, the industry was ready to come up with a set of self-regulation, a very strong signal also to politics. And the third argument in favor of this self-regulation, and I think we can admit this, we should not be too proud. I believe that the current version, the new version 2.0, is a better version than the one that we have in place right now. And it is better because we had to respond to some pressure from the Federal Council. We can admit this. So this collaboration between government and industry eventually helped to come out with a better result. Now, we also can acknowledge that self-regulation is a very Swiss thing. Almost no other country knows this instrument of a self-regulation. And a self-regulation and a decision, as we saw last week, it also has a lot to do with trust. The Federal Council has trust in the industry that we can fix and prevent, combat greenwashing. And we have to pay back this trust. And we pay back this trust if we are decisive, if we act with conviction, and if we act fast. And this is also why some of the timelines look at first glance rather ambitious. The new self-regulation will come into effect already 1st of September. And finally, we know that this means a lot of work for all of you to adjust to, you need to rework processes, in some cases, even organizational changes. And this means a lot of work. And hopefully we, AMAS, can help on this path towards the new self-regulation with webinars like today. Please use also the chance to ask questions. There's an FAQ function open. I know that we cannot answer all questions today, but the goal is to establish a more robust written FAQ that we will publish soon. And the more questions we hear, the better we understand where your pain points are. With this, Guillaume, I hand back to you.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. Moving forward, I'm happy to have with us Martina Vaselli from the Swiss Finance Counsel in Brussels. I think most of our members know you. You'll remember that AMAS became a member of the SFC last year, and we're very happy to have you on board today to give us a brief update on what's happening on the other side of the border. Thanks you, Martina. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Guillaume. And as you say, very happy to be here. As you know, the SFC is based in Brussels, and we are an association representing internationally active Swiss financial institutions with European policymakers and stakeholders. So I'm very happy to give a very quick update on what happens here on greenwashing, and maybe you can go to the next slide. So I start with an overview of the work stream. I think it's important to say that while there is a lot of discussion around greenwashing, we do not have a sort of greenwashing directive or greenwashing legislation. I understand probably in Switzerland this is slightly different. You have a very sort of defined type of initiative specifically named greenwashing, while in the EU this issue is tackled at different levels. I think it's important to mention the work of the European supervisory authorities, in particular ESMA in your case, because we know sustainable finance has been quite a political topic, so legislators managed to agree on, let's say, high-level principles in the level 1 text, but then a lot of technical work defining really the nitty-gritty of the legislation has been mandated to the supervisory authorities, which have now the power to establish technical standards and guidelines defining the details of the legislation. So that's very important to say, because the ESAs have a very important role. And that's also where the ESMA guidelines on the use of ESG and sustainability-related terms for funds names are located. And then obviously the ESAs are also asked to sort of produce some advices and summaries to the Commission. And one of the latest documents they produced is this final report on greenwashing and the supervision of greenwashing risks, including some potential sort of policy suggestions to the European Commission. So that's one side of the coin. At the other side of the coin, obviously, we have the European Commission with its right of initiative. There are several pieces of legislation tackling greenwashing, not necessarily only in the financial sector. In the financial sector, we speak a lot about greenwashing because of the side effects that the application of the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation created. So the SFDR is identified as one of the main sources of greenwashing because of, let's say, the misuse, as you know, of the Article 9 and Article 8 disclosure as labels. So this is why there is now in the pipeline a potential review of the SFDR in view potentially of creating a categorization system for financial products with clear objectives and minimum criteria. So that's the bigger picture. We can go to the next slide maybe. So I just sort of explain a bit more what ESMA tries to do with these guidelines. As I said, a lot of this work at level 2 has been mandated by level 1 legislation. In this case, the guidelines are published under the mandate stemming from the AFMD and the UCITS directive review. And the purpose is to specify the circumstances where the fund names using ESG or sustainability-related terms are unfair, unclear, or misleading. Obviously, the question comes very spontaneously as to how these guidelines interact with the SFDR. In the guidelines, it is written that the new sectoral rules setting standards for fund names or marketing of funds will take precedence over the guidelines. So our understanding is that the moment we have a review of the SFDR, the moment the rules in the SFDR change, then they will have, of course, an impact and they will prevail over these guidelines. Obviously, I mean, the guidelines per se are not legally binding as opposed to the technical standards that the ESAs produce. So formally, they are not legally binding, but in practice, they sort of there is an obligation within 2 months from the publication of the guidelines on national competent authorities to communicate whether they intend to comply or not to comply. And 99.9% of the cases they comply, and the guidelines sort of become formally legally binding once the national competent authorities embed them in their respective frameworks. Maybe again, I sort of quickly sort of give a quick sort of update and summary of what these guidelines consist of. I think this table is already communicating pretty well the complexity of what they create, and substantially what the guidelines say is that if you want to use a certain term belonging to one of the categories that you see at the top of the table, then you should respect some rules for your funds. So there is a sort of horizontal rule for all these categories, which is if a fund has any ESG related words in the name, so transition, environmental, social governance, impact, or sustainability, then a minimum proportion of at least 80% of its investments should be used to meet environmental or social characteristics or sustainable investment objectives in accordance with the elements of the investment strategy as disclosed under the SFDR regulation. And then there are additional requirements depending on the category and minimum exclusions that apply. A difference with the draft version of the guidelines that we have seen in the past months is that, for example, for the category of sustainability-related terms, the ESMA dropped the requirement to have at least 50% of these 80% invested in sustainable investments as defined under the SFDR. And this is because stakeholders and market participants said, okay, we don't exactly know what sustainable investment means under the SFDR. So we cannot really invest in something we don't understand or we don't have a common understanding on. So in place of this requirement, the ESMA decided to sort of put the requirement to commit to invest meaningfully in sustainable investments with no percentage, with no quantitative requirement. Maybe last two comments. One is, again, with respect to the draft guidelines, you should, the ESMA introduced two additional sort of buckets, transition-related terms and impact-related terms. For these two buckets, in addition to the 80% threshold, you have in the transition category the requirement that investments must be on a clear and measurable path to social or environmental transition. And for impact-related terms, investment must be made with the objective to generate positive, measurable social or environmental impact alongside a financial return. So I think that's sort of the wider picture, and maybe just to say, I think it's quite relevant to to mention that we had a discussion with the European Commission on the SFDR review, and they were very blunt in saying we don't think ESMA was very timely to come up with these guidelines because they interact with what we are going to do with the SFDR, and they create a bit of confusion in the market. So the Commission is aware that this is not ideal, and I think there will be developments sort of on the Commission side to make sure that in the next, I would say, year or two, the guidelines to some extent resonate with the future SFDR legislation. So that's just to give an overview. Obviously, I'm happy to even via email take any questions. You have my contacts, Guillaume, so happy to sort of be in contact.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Martina. Very useful. And it's always a pleasure to have you with us. Back to Switzerland, and I don't want to lose too much time, but I think it's useful to give a little bit of background. So Obviously, you all read it through extensive communication, the long-awaited Federal Council communication, which occurred last Wednesday. So where do we come from? That's a brief recap of where we are and where you come from. That's also very useful to understand the timing of the whole process, right? So, as you know, it all began with the Federal Council position on the provision of greenwashing of December 22. Then we had Federal Department of Finance communication in October 23. Then we had those 9 gaps, which we already talked about in the AMAS self-regulation. We had a tight dialogue with the Federal Department of Finance and the SIF. And then we worked intensively with our members to fill those 9 gaps. And we filed a new revised self-regulation at the very end of December last year. We were waiting for the Federal Council strategic decision, and it occurred last Wednesday, as I mentioned. So in red here, you see the Federal Ordinances revision, which is on hold, and the fact that the Federal Council recognized that the 3 self-regulations of both SPA, SIA, and AMAS could pave the way, at least for a near future. So that's for the background. Now, as always, we want to highlight a couple of main advantages of the self-regulation. I'm not going to go into details, but the slides will be on our website shortly after the webinar, so that can provide you also for support in your teams after the webinar. As you all know, the self-regulation has a lot of advantages over state regulation. First of all, it coexists with the existing state regulation, for instance, the Article 12 CISA, but we'll get back to that at the very end of the presentation. One other advantage is obviously is that the self-regulation is flexible, and we proved that by addressing the 9 gaps in only 2 months' time. We underline furthermore that the self-regulation is a free self-regulation. It's not recognized by FINMA, even though our members agreed to propose a recognition by FINMA. As I mentioned before, it has to be read in connection with the others associations self-regulation, so that is SPA and SIA, Swiss Banking, and the Swiss Insurance Association. Lastly, the self-regulation is mandatory for all AMAS members, and it has also an indirect relevance for the guarantee of the irreproachable business conduct. That being said, I think we can jump to the main changes. I will share the floor with Aurelia. So as you all know, and as you have seen on the website, version 2.0 is live since last Wednesday. There was a couple of changes also in the format. Regarding the entry into force, as Adrian mentioned before, the entry into force is set by our board to the 1st of September 2024. Here you will see all the deadlines that have to be complied with. We highlight here that there shouldn't be any material changes for the institute level, as there were no changes from 1.1 to 2.0. So everything that had to be implemented since September 23 will remain into force. We had a meeting this morning with our working group to discuss the entry into force. There might be an overlap, and we will clarify the matter very shortly to make sure that all the industry is aligned and that everybody has the same understanding. Now I think we can switch to the main changes. They are highlighted here. As we mentioned before, the track changes are also available on the website, and they will show you exactly what has changed. We chose with Aurelia to focus on a couple of points today. Definition, which is obviously the heart of the changes that occurred. Then a couple of points on clarification, index funds, reporting, obviously the audit provision, and the 2 new appendixes, which Aurelia will also touch upon while speaking about the definition. So that's the core of today's webinar. And with that, Aurelia, the floor is yours for the definition 2.0.
Thank you, and a warm welcome from my side as well. So as mentioned, The definition is really one of the key elements that changes in the self-regulation 2.0. The definition of sustainability has been reworked based on the Federal Council position on greenwashing from December 16, 2022, and basically, the definition of a collective asset presented as sustainable is basically a collective asset which, in addition to a financial goal, also has a sustainability goal pursued for at least 70% of its assets, excluding cash and derivatives. So this is now the new Article 3, so the essence of the new Article 3. And we'll deep dive in a second on the sustainability goal definition, which has two aspects. But basically, so one way to look at it is as described on the slide. First of all, to think about the financial goal that the product and service has, plus the sustainability goal that it has, and within once a product has basically a sustainability goal, then the question is to what extent it is aligned to the sustainability goal, or to what extent it actually contributes to a sustainability goal. And this alignment and contribution elements were provided and were definitely the core of the definition from the Federal Council of its position on greenwashing. If we move now to the next slide, we have basically we can deep dive now in what does that mean that a product basically pursue, in addition to its financial goal, a sustainability goal. Then basically there are two critical elements to keep in mind, and this is also part of the Article 3 of the self-regulation. First, the sustainability goal pursued is defined according to a well-defined reference framework, and we'll come into that in a second. So it has to be anchored in a reference framework, and then second, and so extremely important, the goal pursued needs to be measured and monitored through specific indicators. So that's how sustainability goals are defined. And then in Appendix 2, we also listed some examples of what a sustainability goal can look like. And those are obviously examples and not necessarily, I mean, it's not an exhaustive list, but for example, a sustainability objective can include basically favoring investments that have relatively good sustainability operational excellence as compared to other to the relevant frameworks that are in use and that actually improve and show and demonstrate material improvement in this area. On the other hand, it's basically when you can see when there is the investment basically avoid sustainability has a lower operational excellence compared when you look at the reference framework you are looking at. So those are many examples that can help you define basically what a sustainability goal is. If we now move to the reference framework, and that's also at the heart of the definition, the reference framework based on which the sustainability goal is defined can be based on different criteria. And in Article 3 basically lists 4 aspects. First, reference framework can, for instance, be based on criteria that are adopted by a national or foreign public body, criteria that are developed by a non-government body. Can also use criteria that reflects general industry practice that is generally accepted. And finally, it's the use of criteria that are developed by the fund management company or the asset manager itself. And some of the examples can obviously include the Swiss climate scores, but also the EU taxonomy. So those are valid reference framework. The SASB standards, the UN SDGs are also other example of criteria by a non-governmental body. Then, of course, the use of ESG ratings and metrics. So this is more the later one, basically widely generally accepted industry practice, and it's developed by the fund management company. And that also includes basically proprietary rating models. So using the ESG ratings and scores that are used by each institutions. So this is basically the reference framework based on which the sustainability goal can be defined. And on top, as I mentioned, of the reference framework, there needs to be specific indicator that needs to be measured and monitored for a product and a service to be called sustainable. Now, if we move to the next slide, we can actually make the link to the sustainability investment approaches, and that were the core of the self-regulation 1.0. And basically here, as we saw earlier, so you've got financial goal, sustainability goal, then is it aligned or does it contribute to this goal? And finally, how to make that decision on whether the product is aligned or contribute. And for that, sustainability investment approaches are very useful, and this is a bit of a visual summary of what was listed in Appendix 3, where basically on the left side you have all the approach where that has basically a financial goal only, and that cannot be called sustainable. So it is basically ESG integration alone, exclusion alone, proxy voting alone, and also ESG integration and or exclusion and or proxy voting combined. So the combination of one, two, or three of those are not basically considered as sustainable, and are looking mostly at the financial aspects. Then for an approach, the sustainability investment approaches that are aligned, that go into a direction that can basically reflect an alignment, are basically the best-in-class approach and positive screening, stewardship, thematic, and climate alignment, and approaches that could be used for in the case of a contribution to a sustainability goals. Then we have stewardship, when it's really part of the investment strategy, and of course impact. So this is more of an implication and a great tool to kind of map, basically trying to map the approaches to the definition. With that, I think that's basically in a nutshell the definition part, and we can move to the other aspects of the self-regulation that have changed. Guillaume.
Thanks a lot, Aurelia. Indeed, so let's jump to less technical matters. Article 17 has been changed also in order to fill one gap of the Federal Department of Finance. So there is a new sentence that was introduced. You'll see here it on your screen. The composition of the index has now to be explained in the fund documentation, and moreover, explanations have to be provided on how the index composition is compatible with the sustainability goals, which links up to what Aurelia was explaining before. So that's for the index funds. Then there is also a quick fix for the Article 21 on reporting to align with the new definition and provide more information on the KPI used. Moreover, more information is needed in case of stewardship, so namely goal setting, number of interviews conducted, results of the commitment, and compliance with the whole process. So that's for the reporting provision, and now we can jump. We're almost done with the main changes, and we finish with an important one. The introduction of an independent audit. So as you see in the first paragraph, the first paragraph states that the compliance with self-regulation 2.0 will be verified on the basis of an audit program drawn up by the AMAS. More on that in the next steps in a minute. This verification has to be done by an independent audit company as part of the existing prudential audit. And then we have two more requirements. In the case of products, the verification is carried out in the form of a separate appendix to the existing audit report. And regarding the requirements applicable to the institution itself, the review will take the form of a supplementary report to the board of directors. So more to come on that in a minute. Obviously, it's not into force yet, and we still have quite a lot of work to do during the summer to come up with an audit program. But Aurélia will elaborate on that in just a second. Which brings me already to the next steps. Aurélia, if you want to take over.
Yeah. And so for the next step, basically two points. So first of all, Guillaume mentioned the audit program that is now part of the self-regulation 2.0. And for that, we have basically formed a dedicated working group that is ready to be launched to basically draft this new audit program over the summer, and so the audit program would be ready in a couple of months based on the work of this working group, and that would help basically for the implementation of the self-regulation 2.0. Then the second aspect that is very important and critical also to help for implementation is the FAQ. So we are working on a FAQ 3.0, and the idea is basically building on the questions that we receive from our members. Our working group will also make sure that those questions are addressed, because as you know, it's not Guillaume or myself that makes the decisions and write those FAQ. It's basically the work, and it reflects the views of the industry, and that's why our working groups, they are very, very important and are the holder of those. So if you have any questions, send it to us via email. The ones that you started asking also on the chat are super important. If we can answer them directly, we will. But if it requires an industry view more generally, then we will definitely ensure that it's reflected in the FAQ. Then, as always, we tried to be fast. So last week we had the announcement and the decision from the Federal Council, and that's why we put together this webinar so that our members get the information as soon as possible. But of course, we are aware that it was a bit of a short notice. Not all of your colleagues may have been able to join. And so that's why we will rerun a second webinar that will be exactly the same as this one in August for those who could not attend the one from today. With that, I think those are our main next steps, and I'll back to you, Guillaume. I give it for the final.
Thanks a lot. Before closing up, we're a bit ahead of time, but I think being at the end of June, that won't be a problem for anyone. That's a key message we started spreading around a couple of weeks ago, and we want to use you, our members, also to spread the message. So you probably saw last week on the very same day of Federal Council communication, there were a lot of attacks. These attacks were mainly aimed at stewardship, but usually they are also targeted at alleged greenwashing. So what we started showing around in various circles in our internal expert committees, but also in various webinars, seminars that we are attending, is a graphic view to show today in Switzerland what are the tools to prevent greenwashing. We always start by saying that as of today, there is no case of greenwashing in the financial sector. That's not the case in all sectors, but at least in the financial sector, there is no case. And here you can see, and that also can be used in your internal meetings or to brief your colleagues. You see the wide array of tools we have today to fight greenwashing. So first of all, you see the set of the three self-regulations, AMAS, the Swiss Banking and Swiss Insurance Association. Then you also have a directive of the Commission Suisse pour la Loyauté, which was released at the end of last year, which could also pave the way for administrative, civil, or even criminal law proceedings. Then you have the FINMA guidance that we all know of since 2021. Also on the stock exchange side, you have a 6th sustainability handbook, which was released also in December last year. And then let's not forget that we also have legal basis. We have Article 12 of CISA, and we also have something that is less known, but the UCA, so la loi sur la concurrence déloyale, UVG, was revised also last December, and a new litera X was introduced specifically to prevent greenwashing and to pave the way for proceedings if companies, including in the financial sector, use greenwashing in their advertisement. So with that, I think we are over. Obviously, we remain, Aurelia and myself, at your entire disposal. We're also happy to make contacts with Martina if you have more EU-specific questions. As Aurelia mentioned, we're not going to answer the questions right now, since some of them are technical, but obviously you can shoot us an email to the email that was on the slides, or in the FAQ that will be recorded, and we will take them over in the summer when we finish the work that we started already months ago on FAQ 3.0. So with that, thanks a lot for your participation today, and we are at your disposal in case you have any questions. Thank you.